Meadows this morning. Before I get started on his introduction to that, he wants me to let you know that out of all the things that he's been accused of, 98.7% of that he's been acquitted of. So the other 1.3% is still out there, so you're going to have to ask him about that directly. But anyways, Dr. William C. Meadows is professor of anthropology and Native American studies at Missouri State University. He holds a BA from Indiana University with a double major in anthropology and history and an MA and PhD degrees in cultural anthropology from the University of Oklahoma. So he's both a Hoosiers fan and a Sooners fan. He's the author of 8 books, 6 of which focus on Native American veterans, including The First Code Talkers, Native American Communicators in World War I, and Kiowa Military Societies, as well as numerous articles and book chapters on Native American veterans, Native American code talkers, art, geography, maps, language, and tribal names. In 2004, Dr. Meadows testified before a congressional Senate hearing on the role of Native American code talkers in the United States Armed Forces. His testimony and research contributed to the passage of the 2008 Code Talkers Recognition Act, which brought federal recognition for all Native American code talkers. He has spoken at numerous national venues and abroad on Native American code talkers. He is the historian for the Comanche Indian Veterans Association and head of the Missouri State Native American Studies Program. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Bill Meadows for us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me down. I've been to Mississippi before, but never to this part of the state, and I'm enjoying it. Very, very lovely and everything, so thank you. Do we have any veterans in the audience today? Would you please stand just a second? We just want to say thank you, guys. Thank you for all that you do for us. I got involved in this work starting back about 1989. It's still ongoing, different aspects, but what I want to do today is walk you through a little bit of part anthropology, part cultural, part linguistics, but an overview of Native American code talking, which has been one of my main areas of research. Let me see if I can get acquainted with this here real quick.
Center button?
Might be. You have to help me a minute. I have a vision problem.
Okay, the center one?
The center one? Okay.
Center one, yes.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about
Then
that.
the
Thank
bottom
you.
one will back it up.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a post-cataract issue I'm going through, and my close-up vision is really, really limited, so just please bear with me. If I stumble off the audience, you're going to catch me. But I'll do the best I can. I always dedicate all these talks to this gentleman here. He was a World War II veteran and one of the Comanche code talkers, and we were working on research that had to do with the Native American Men's Ceremonial Associations, which are still very active today, veterans organizations. And got off the subject one day, and we talked about his MOS, his military occupation specialty, and he started describing how him and 16 other Comanches were recruited in the fall of, let's see here, very, very late 1940s, so almost a year before Pearl Harbor, and taken Fort Benning and Fort Gordon and trained, but their charge was to develop a code that was only in their heads, it wouldn't be written down, and that no German or anybody else could ever figure, even other Comanches wouldn't be able to understand it and everything. That's how this project started, and worked off of there. So I still think very highly of this gentleman, miss him greatly, and I always dedicate my programs to him and everything. So how does Native American code talking start and everything? Well, we are in World War I, of course, and America tries to stay neutral pretty much, and we get dragged into it in the last 2 years. It's really the last part of the summer and fall of, I don't know if this had a pointer or not, I don't think it does. Okay, the summer and fall of 1918. And the problem that we're having is our communications are compromised. Everything that we're doing, the Germans are a step ahead of us in France and everything. And so there's a relatively limited number of ways you could communicate at this time in World War I. There are phones between companies with wires. But anywhere you clip into that, it's a party line. It's like the old party line. Anyone can listen in there. Yeah, we had that. when I was a kid, we still had it. There were distance listening devices, so the Germans had these, we had some as well, but you could set back even 2 to 4 kilometers away from the front line and with a magnetic coil pull in a radio or phone signal and just listen to it, so you could tap into it that way. We had a buzzer phone which worked on a number of lights that would light up and different links and pauses of buzzing sounds, but it was very, very slow device to encrypt something, send the message, and then decode it, so it was very timely. And then we had runners. Runners could physically carry a message, but 1 in 4 of them were either being shot or they were being captured. So either your message wasn't going through or the Germans intercepted the message. So the minute that a man popped up out of a trench and went running down the line, everybody knew what he was doing, and snipers would open up and things. So what we needed something that was secure and immediate, something faster than the existing technology that we had. And this was the best that the world had, both the Germans and we had it at the time. We need something faster than coding and decoding methods because that's eating up so much time in the system. So the ideas come along. There was no plan for this originally. It wasn't in Army manuals. It wasn't in existing training or anything. It was all developed organically in the units in the field to solve an existing problem. And so different units thinking, how can we get a message across that they just simply will not be able to break. We don't care if they hear it, but we need it so they cannot break it and everything. And units that had large number of Native Americans basically all came up with the same idea. They would hear these guys sitting around the camps talking to each other in their units, and different officers got the idea of what if we put them on the phone and let them start giving the messages and everything. And that's really how it starts. So we have the very first groups, for many decades, the whole world, and myself included, thought that the Choctaws were the first code talkers because that's the best documentation that we had. And so one day I had to call my friend down at the Choctaw Nation and said, well, I have good news and bad news. What's the good news? Well, I found some other code talkers. Great. What's the bad news? They did it before you, you know. And then I had to call her again. You're now in 3rd place. And well, anyway, she quit counting. But anyway, so we found several groups that we have specific dates for now. And the bigger point is it doesn't matter who did it first. What matters is getting them recognized and identifying them and understand they all basically made equal contributions. A couple of the Lakota are used from North Dakota are used in the 1st Division, Standing Rock Reservation. Shortly after that, or around the same time, 2 Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. And I've got maps showing these tribes' basic locations and also their modern-day tribal flags with them. Eastern Band Cherokee from North Carolina are used in October, early in October. Choctaw and Oklahoma Cherokee, the other was the North Carolina Cherokee. The Choctaw and Oklahoma Cherokee are used a little bit later in October 26th. There's a handful of other groups that we know were used during World War I, but we simply do not have documentation as to the day they started doing that. So this timeline could change, with future research and everything. But there's several different groups that were used. These are 2 of the gentlemen from Standing Rock. These are Lakotas from Standing Rock Reservation. And so Richard Blue Earth, and this is Albert Grass closest to me, and Richard Blue Earth over there. They both eventually were killed in action in World War I, but for 3 days they used them to transmit messages and foil the Germans. They couldn't understand what they were doing. And so this made it to where we could implement our plans, carry forth attacks and move supplies and men and things without tipping off the Germans. And that was the whole value of it, was the speed and the security. These are some records from Robert Big Thunder. He and his brother-in-law, John Longtail, both volunteered, enlisted, went in the 3rd Infantry Division, and they were used at Chateau Thierry and some of the fights around that area. This is a letter he printed that Robert Big Thunder wrote home to his father. He got wounded so bad at Chateau Thierry, he had to be medically evacuated and eventually sent back home to recuperate. So he wrote a letter home to his dad, and he was a Carlisle Indian School graduate, so it got published. A lot of veterans' letters were published in the school newsletters and things. This is his card up in the National Archives, and you can see where it says he went over the top 3 times. Also adopted the Indian code signal and everything. And so that's what they used to refer to. They didn't call them code talkers at this time. They just called them Indian talkers or Indian communicators, things of that nature. But those 2 gentlemen from that area. The Eastern Band Cherokee were used again early October near St. Quentin and Cambrai. And so we are basically, the 30th Division, Old Hickory, has kind of reached a stalemate there. They can't progress against the German forces. And every time they try to do something, it gets preemptively countered. And so one of the officers, Lieutenant John Stanley, was in the National Guard before it got federalized and they went into service. And he knew that there were a lot of Cherokees in that unit because he'd served with it for several years in the National Guard. So he was a battalion signal officer, and he said, you know, if we can look some of those guys up, they're in the division here, we just got to find them. And so he corralled a bunch of those guys up, and they began to form radio units. And immediately, as soon as they switched into Cherokee, they progressed forward. The Germans were not able to intercept and stymie their advancements and everything. Unfortunately, we don't have the list of the men, but I've checked the rosters, and there are many, many Cherokee men in those units, so we know that it adds up with the captain's report and everything. This is probably the best documented one. These are some of the 5 of the 8 original Choctaws that first used the code. And so this is in the Meuse-Argonne campaign, late in the war, which was a big, final push. And a lot of the American forces in this region, they are shooting for Sedan. Everybody is heading towards Sedan because if you can take Sedan, you take a major highway and railroad network hub, and that will sever the German army in half. They will not be able to resupply or reman half of the entire German army. And so that was the goal. Well, they're fighting towards that, and the Germans have all been pushed back across the Iron River, except for this peninsula, this horseshoe here, called Forest Farm in English, Forest Farm in French. It's an elevated position, and there's about 500 Germans that hold it. It's barbed wire, trenched, everything, machine guns, very heavily fortified. The American Allied forces can't get across it until they take this, and it has an elevated command, so it can control approaches to any direction. The French try and take it twice, and they are heavily repulsed and everything. So the 36th Division from Oklahoma is commanded to take this position. And so they realize that Germans have been leaving telephones behind as they retreat, and a lot of the telephones are still active. They're not disassembling them or taking the components. So they realize they're hoping we'll just use their phones, and it'll make it even easier for them to listen in. So decision comes down in the 36th Infantry. They said, we have a company there. Company E was known as the Indian Company. And it was, originally it was entirely, there's 215 men, entirely native, with the exception of about 5 officers. And a few men had been transferred as replacements, but it still retained about 60% native all through the war. It had members of 14 tribes that spoke 26 different languages from eastern central Oklahoma. So a call came down to Captain Horner there, and he knew a lot of these men. Again, he had served in the National Guard before the war and knew a lot of these men personally, some of them. So these men had all been to Indian boarding school and down around Bochito, Oklahoma. They were not only good in English, but perfectly fluent in Choctaw. So they wanted people that could speak both, perfectly bilingual. He recruits them. They design what they're going to do, and they send out orders to redeploy men and get everything into position, all in Choctaw. They send out the announcement of the time, the date, exactly what they're going to do, and it goes off without a hitch. They know the Germans can hear it, but they'll never figure out what it is we're speaking nor what is the content of it. And so they launch a 20-minute artillery barrage at 4:10 in the afternoon. So what they're doing is they're strategically doing it just before dusk to where the sun, the setting sun, is in the eyes of the German position. Plus they have smoke and other things they have to see through. And the men are ordered to rush double time right behind the artillery. It's falling in 3-minute increments. And so they're rushing up very, very close to it. They take the position before the Germans can even get out of their trenches and things. And so approximately 270 or so were killed, and the rest were taken captive and everything. So this was, again, another case where it was just absolutely demonstrated for sure they cannot break these native languages, and this is a very important tactic. Immediately, they were sent back to a relief station after this battle. Their group was increased from 8 to 21, and they were given 5 days instruction of how better to send messages. But also they realized there are some things in the Choctaw vocabulary they don't have words for, traditional words. They have a word for gun, but they didn't have a word for a rifle versus a pistol versus a .30 caliber Browning, so forth and so on. And they could describe a cannon, but is it an 88, a 10, what caliber, etc. So they formed code words there during that week and practiced. They finished their training on November 10th and were getting ready to head towards Metz. And then what happened the next day? The armistice, right? So they finished their code training literally the day before the armistice. So the language worked, they actually created code, but they didn't get to use the code before the war ended and everything. So this is the position there. You can see all the barbed wire and the 3-minute increments for the artillery, which would force you down in the trenches underground, and then they rushed and took it. So this idea, we don't know if it was how much it was passed around, but we know several cases of it independently being realized simply by hearing these guys in the camps and they're talking in their native language. This is Calvin Atchevin. He was awarded the Belgian War Cross for using Comanche, talking Comanche. Unit got totally surrounded by Germans, and they needed aid and assistance. Well, if they called back in English, they would probably be swamped and overran. So they did it in Comanche with other Comanches, and he started calling in artillery fire. And one of the other Comanches was in the artillery unit, and I got to interview his son that knew the accounts from his dad and everything. And so they started using Comanche in this unit. There were 5 Comanches in that unit, and organized them. It didn't take a lot of these guys. You just needed 2 points, one for observation and orders, the others to hand them off at the back. And so made a really impact. He got shot through the arm in one fight, still managed to, with a rifle, killed another German, took another one captured, and later got a Distinguished Service Cross and everything. So that was him with his awards here. And I got to interview his nephew that grew up with him, and he showed me right where his bullet wounds were and everything. He remembered being with his uncle as a young boy. This is just a list of some of the groups that we know of. There could be others still, but again, this was all done in the field. It's not very well documented. There was no formal military plan or anything. So a lot of this was just done to solve an existing problem and move on and everything. But these are some of the, we know the numbers of some of the groups specifically. Others, obviously, it has to have 2 or more individuals, but we simply don't have a list of the people and everything. So what happens, what we come out of this first in World War I was I quickly realized there's 2 things going on here, and it'll be expanded in World War II. The first is there's 2 kinds of code talking here, right? So type 1 is what I describe as it's specially devised coded vocabulary. And that's what the Choctaw just invented. They realized that some of the modern technology, we don't have terms. Let's create words. We'll insert that into the normal Choctaw language and vocabulary. And even other Choctaws won't know what we're talking about if they were to hear it. And then there's other groups where they just pulled them together. There's no time for training, and they just said, get this message across to this guy, the best you can. And we don't know if they maybe improvised or developed some words or just described it at length, but it was just equally effective. And again, the Germans would never know what they're saying. What's important at the time is this is a little different than our normal thought of what a code is, you know, and everything. But what they were doing was referred to as codes by both the military and their records and by the news press. So it was quickly being realized this is just a newer type of code that we're using. It's all going to be voice-based. So what happens after the war? Well, the first thing is this is a very popular, not urban myth, but a very popular myth that all code talking was hush-hush and secretive and everything. Only with the Navajo. Nothing else could be further than the truth with the other groups. So this is March 28th, Oklahoma Daily News. They reprinted Colonel Bloor's letter, and the colonel, he was the colonel in the 36th that had the idea to use the Choctaw. He was asked to fill out a form describing what he did for one of their historical searches at the end of the war. Well, you can see that letter was published in Flageney, France on February 27th, and then it was reprinted in the United States and started spreading out. There was no effort to keep this secret. The war was over. Everybody was happy they survived and wanted to get back home. And this was just seen as something, again, to solve an existing problem in the field, not something that would necessarily become standard fare or practice or anything of that nature. There's another one there on January 21st, very early, where the officers are coming back. They're giving public talks and speeches, and they mention how they used the code talkers and what it, you know, entailed and everything. So they were proud of them. They got quite a bit of little press there for a little bit, but no effort whatsoever. So Choctaw tongue gave surprise to the Germans, and Indians conveyed order to advance and things. So it was very, very open on this end. The irony of all this, of course, is that these young veterans, the vast majority of them went through different forms of Indian boarding schools. Now, some were extremely, extremely strict to the point of they would put you in court and you'd get a big settlement today strict. And then there were others that were a little more lenient depending on the superintendent and where you were. But these are, this is a Carlisle Indian school, one of the most strict ones and everything. But in these schools, generally kids were emphasized, if not physically coerced in cases, to not speak their languages and everything. But the older boys that went into this were resilient enough, and by that time the language was set in them firm enough, they could remember their language after they got out of boarding school. And now they had a unique contribution that they could make for the United States Army. And they were very, very glad to do it and willing. There was never any cases of anybody saying, no, I don't want to do this or this. By this time, they realized, you know, Germany's attack is on America. That affects everybody over here. And so they were very supportive and enthusiastic to do it and everything. So what happens after the war? Well, there's a few French decorations, and the natives performed very, very well in World War I. There's a lot of important awards that they win, but they had to do with individual actions and things, not anything to do with code talk and everything of that nature. So there isn't any, nor really today we expect that, but back then there was an expectation. If you're asked to do something, there's times where one guy was a cook and he was taken off the line and put on a radio because he spoke fluent Cherokee and everything. He didn't expect an award or anything, he just asked to do it. That was the assignment to reach the situation and everything. Code talkers are mentioned in a lot of the officers' biographies and things, and of course newspapers and things. There's no special recognition, you know, here from the U.S. and everything, but the Army remains aware of it. They do not forget this tactic, and there's, like I said, they did that historical report on Native service in World War I, so the records, it is documented a little bit, and it's in the records. So what happens now coming up with World War II, which is only going to be about 19, 20 years away, give or take. So boarding schools are still in existence, and they are still discouraging native language use, even though parts of the Indian Reorganization Act in '34 guaranteed the right to use native speech and practice religion and all those things. It took quite a while for those things to really get in effect. So this is the generation, some of these guys that I got to interview while they were still with us. And so most all of them, they spoke, they went home in the summer, they just spoke what they spoke at home. So they weren't at permanent boarding schools where they never saw home again. So the holidays, sometimes on a weekend, and always in the summer, they went home and immediately spoke what their language was. They're not going to forget it. And so they were just out of high school, and the Army began in late 39, all the way up to early 41, started recruiting small units of natives specifically to train as code talkers and have codes ready again. So there's a combined group of Oneida and Chippewa, which are two different languages, two different tribes, out of Michigan and Wisconsin, a group of Comanches from Oklahoma, a group of Mesquawkies. You would know them better as the Fox in Sac and Fox. You hear the tribal name Sac and Fox. The Mesquawky are the Fox part of that group. And then later there's a group of Hopi, which are pulled together and everything. And so most of these gentlemen, as you can see, by early 41 to late 39, they're already in there. They've created these codes. They're trained. They're ready for, we know the war's coming, but not exactly the day and everything. The Navajo will start in May of 42. That's when they recruit, very last of April. They recruit their very first 29 Navajos to go through boot camp and everything and training, and then they trained as code talkers and everything. There is a series of meetings between 43 and 44, which again, we're heavily in the Pacific by this time, and we're using the Navajos, but we haven't hit D-Day yet. We're in North Africa, we're in Italy, Sicily, in those areas, but we haven't made it to D-Day yet for Europe. And so there's a series of meetings between military commanders, and to summarize it, they're basically still kind of skeptical of this, even though other officers point out it was used in the Great War. It was effective. There was no question of any kind of subterfuge or disloyalty or anything of that nature. But the problem was the military said, we can't monitor these messages. None of us speak these languages. So we're basically just trusting that they're accurate enough and that it's going to work. And that was the problem. A military, when it uses codes, it of course has the key to the code or understands the system, and they can make sure it's accurate and everything. So there was always some, I don't want to say distrust, but lack of confidence here and everything. And so what happened was that kind of stymied the code talker development. The Army kept the few units that it had, but it didn't expand them. The Marines went ahead with the Navajos. The Navy basically said, we tried some, they're okay, but we don't really need them, and we'll pass on expanding it. So what happened was it really kept the Army units small, but independently, company commanders, sometimes colonels, different things of this nature, they would realize, hey, I have 2, 3, 5, 7 guys from the same tribe here who speak a common language. I'm going to make radio men out of them. So a lot of it was done de facto. It was just done off the cuff and things of that nature. And so the groups up there at the top are the type 1. They actually had formal vocabularies. I'll show you some examples here shortly. The others were just doing it in their everyday vernacular and whatever it took to describe or create a word once in a while when you needed it. And so again, here we have a really good case of the type 1 groups versus the type 2 groups. No secrecy again, sorry folks. So I just sent an article off in Ethnohistory to see if they'll publish it, but I was doing newspapers.com and newspaper archives, and I'm close to 400 articles just between like the middle of 1940 into like 1941 or 2, over 400 articles announcing the groups that we're going to use as code talkers and everything. It has photographs of some of them. It lists the members' names, the officers. It tells what unit they're in and everything. And for years I thought, I'd seen these pictures and I'm like, why would they do that? That's not. But I finally found some articles from 1940 describing it. And some of the authors said, this was sit down and discussed, and we realized it doesn't matter if the Germans know this is Mesquawky or this is Comanche that they're facing here, because the languages are not written down. You can't go to a library and pull this stuff out, But more importantly, they do not have access to these communities where they're spoken. And people were very, there was actual espionage, some in World War II, some Germans here that were arrested and things for espionage. So people were very keen and wary of anybody coming into the community, that was not from there. So it really didn't matter whether they knew or not. And so there was a lot of publicity about this. So Indians code upsets foes. They speed dial messages by radio in war games. And this one is Comanches again called for Army Code Service. And it also talks about their use in World War I. So again, there's just hundreds of these. And I thought I might find a few, but I was really surprised at how many I ended up with and everything. Here's a good example. These are some Pimas. And I was actually able, after I got this article, to track down and find a staff sergeant that was with this unit at Fort Sill. I didn't tell him what I was after. I got his connection, called him, and I said, I understand you're in the 158th, the year at Fort Sill. He goes, yeah, I was there, and I was staff sergeant. And then after that, I got reassigned, and I ended up going to Europe, so I never saw those guys again. I said, well, what did you do at Fort Sill? He goes, well, a lot of the time, I had these teams of 5 Indians. Each team was 5 Indians. He said, I spent an awful lot of time out in the field, and I gave them a message, and they talked in Pima. And he goes, I don't have a word of what they're saying. And they told it to another Pima, and then that officer wrote it down, and then we compared notes, And he says, it was spot on, He said, I spent a lot of time to train these guys. Well, do you remember any of their names? Well, sure. I spent a whole year with them. So he started naming off some of the guys that we know were the same guys that did it and everything like that. So this is, again, no attempt to cover it up whatsoever and everything. But they ended up being the Bushmasters that went to Panama to train and then went over to the South Pacific and made quite a name for themselves and everything. And there's at least, I found 2 officers' reports of using them, just in personal interviews and things. And so we know that there was 5 different tribes. They had many tribes because this group came out of Phoenix and Tucson. And so it had tons of people from the Phoenix Indian School and many, many tribes. But there's at least 5 tribes that were used for these messages. So these are the Type 1 groups in World War II. So again, these are the ones that were formally recruited specifically to train to develop codes. The Hopis were already in service, but they were culled, and that's hard to do. It's hard to get a specific man transferred, just one. But they pulled together these 8 Hopis to form a team, and then that's what they did through the rest of the war. This is the first group I worked with. This is 15 of the 17 Comanche code talkers while they were at Fort Benning. And so they developed their code in about a 6-week period, practice trained in early and mid 41. So they had this done before Pearl Harbor, but they would not go into action until 44. So they had a long time that they practiced this and honed it, and it just became second nature for them. But there was several of these guys, about 4 or 5 of them in the picture here were still alive that I knew and interviewed a lot for my second project and everything. This is Wellington Mike Hobie. He's running a switchboard here. This is Forrest Castleboy, my friend again, and he said, come up back, I got something I want to show you one day. And he said, remember when I told you we were taking Sherburne? I said, yeah. He said, well, I took a few things too, Anyway, he had a few souvenirs as soldiers do and everything like that, but he's very, very proud of that flag that he brought back and everything. These are the Meskwakis, and again, there's a newspaper clipping. They're wearing, it's a staged, kind of a cheesy photo, but some of the families told me, they said, yeah, Dad always said, we don't wear those kind of headdresses. Those are Lakota things, But anyway, that's what they got for them to wear, and they had them all in their uniforms, and there's the officer doing the message with them and machine gun practice. But anyway, there was just a swath of articles, and my search was not exhaustive by any means, but I have something like 50 different newspapers that has the same photo in it, in the explanation. And then this is the 8 members there. Might be a little light for you. It's a pretty faded photograph there. And they went into North Africa, Kasserine Pass, that area, on over to Italy and up that way. 3 of the 5 of them become POWs eventually, and one of them escaped twice and was recaptured each time. And in one case, he escaped the camp. He got a set of German outfit, uniform, everything. It had money in the pocket. He hid out. After about 3 days, he was just starving. So he was in this little bitty village. He looked around, no Germans. He went in, and he decided he would just point at something and put down so much money he'd have to get his change back, so he didn't have to talk or anything. And so the girl was really kind of eyeing him a little bit, but she gave him the change and everything, you know. And everything was fine. He had his food, and he got a big thing of bread or something, and said her eyes looked up behind him, and he turned around, and 3 German army guys had just walked in the bakery or whatever it was. And they looked at him, and, you know, like that. He held up his bread, you know. He said, I just was too dark for a German, you know, and his looks gave him away, you know, so. But anyway, they all survived, came back. This is a team of 7 Lakotas. One of them's taken the photo, but they were called out of the 1st CAV division. They were from 7 different reservations, all spoke different dialects of Lakota, but mutually intelligible. And so they formed radio teams, and what they would do, 2 at a time, would slip through the American lines, get behind the Japanese lines, and then go in depth to do reconnaissance of supply bases, travel routes, troop strengths and locations, etc. Radio it in Lakota, immediately unhook and move, because they could pinpoint by the strength of your message and get locational and directional indications of where you were. So they were constantly zigzagging and bobbing around, and then they would have to recross both groups' lines and get back to safety. And so, but they all made it home. And they were given the term MacArthur's boys because they actually sent messages for MacArthur when he was in the New Guinea, Philippines areas. This is the group of 8 Hopis in their uniforms. They have really good photos of them all. And one of the interesting things I discovered here is, if you've ever been to Hopi, it has 4 mesas, 4 different big, long, you know, like high mesa tables that the villages are on. 3 of these gentlemen came from First Mesa, and they came from the village of Tewa. Well, Tewa is another group that joined the Hopis back around the 1600s or so. So they have their own language first, and they speak Hopi second. Well, in this team, when those 3 members talked to each other, they talked in Tewa. That's their mother language. When they talked to the other 5, they switched into Hopi. So they were actually using 2 languages in a team of 8 guys, you know. And they were in the Pacific at like Peleliu, Ongar, that region out in there, and saw a lot of action. These are Clinkets, 6 Clinkets that I've recently been working with. That 2 sets were in the Army, one in the Philippines, one in the Aleutian Islands, and then the other 2 gentlemen were in the U.S. Navy and everything. But they're just, again, they realized they had 2 groups with 2 speakers of a common language, put them on point A and B, and they can do a lot of good communication-wise. The Navajo, of course, are, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Navajo today. They've been so well researched, but I do have stuff in my works about the Navajo. But they're so famous because they were the biggest. They had possibly as many as 420 people trained in the code. At least 285 of them saw combat and everything. But we had Navajo at all our bases in the Pacific. We had them in Hawaii. We had them in San Francisco. And so we could relay messages back. And one report that I was shown, I think it was the Marine Corps Archives, after we first got into Japan a few days after the atomic bomb, the first few days of messages were sent back in Navajo. They didn't want the word out yet. They wanted to get it back to the high command and discuss it and everything like that. But some of the code talkers went ashore with the first troops that occupied Japan after the war. A lot of them, if you start looking closely, a lot of them look very Asiatic. And I have a whole manuscript submitted right now. There are many Navajo code talkers who were confused by looking too similar to the Japanese, and they were captured by other American troops. Not the guys in their own company or anything, but they'd be running a message and coming back, and people see them and think they're Japanese in a uniform. Here's some of the code words, so just to give you an idea. So, like Atsa, Navajo, Atsa was eagle, which was used for a transport plane. Hopi used the word Pa'aki, houses on water, to describe a ship. Comanche used Wakare, turtle, to represent tank. And then they also developed alphabets. So I want to say Natchez in a message. I can't say Natchez in any accent. People are going to know what I'm talking about, or Paris or Berlin. I'm going to say in Comanche, now listen to me, and then I just start saying a list of words. And I'm going to use the words for nut, ants, cheese, hail, right? I'm going to make sure I spell Natchez right. Eagle, and then, is it Z or S? Z. Zebra or something, right? And I can spell out any town, any name, any unit, any place on a map. There's nothing I can't communicate. So these groups have these phonetic alphabets in addition to the language code. This is just a list of words. I'm going to have to hurry up because I know I'm running behind here. Sewing machine gun for a 30 caliber machine gun, because that's what the sound, it was like pumping a Singer sewing machine. Like that, right? Landmine, it goes off by itself. You know, you can't see it, it just goes off by itself when you step on it and everything. A tank become a turtle. The telephone was called metal talking, because they were made out of metal back in the day. They even had a term for Adolf Hitler.
Crazy.
That
work.
is a legitimate code word in the Comanche Code in World War II. You know, so this is a group, amazing. They had 15 natives, 8 different tribes, and there were others back at the base. These are bombing groups in the 5th Army Air Corps, and they're all matched up with 2 languages. So a Hopi guy gets a message, passes it in English to the Apache guy. The Apache guy can send it to the other Apache guy in Apache. He can then put it into English, and it can just keep going and going and going. And so they had this very dynamic radio, multilingual radio net in the 5th Army Air Corps there. And these are 2 of the guys that knew about it and everything. This is just a real quick list of some of the groups, but what I want you to, main point to realize is they were everywhere. They're in the Aleutian Islands, they're in the Pacific, they're in North Africa, they're in the Mediterranean, they're in Europe, and France and all this kind of stuff. We use code talkers everywhere, all up and down our areas in small numbers. And then these are just others. There's a lot of Sioux guys, a lot of different tribes here, Pueblo tribes, and Eastern tribes, etc. And then there's a couple of them. There's some training pictures, right? These are Oneidas, these Hopi, those are Navajo. But again, they were there, very lightweight equipment to do the message and move. That's what they're for. Okay, why does it work? That's the important part. Okay, the first thing, little known obscure languages from a German and Japanese viewpoint, right? They're known in the native communities, but that's it. Most Americans, most of these languages, very few white people spoke them at this time. Maybe if you were a trader that lived in the community, or like a minister that was ministering to them, you had learned the language. But it was not going to be well-known or accessible. So they're largely unknown, they're unwritten. It's a complete language. It's not a mathematical, like a code or a cipher, where I'm just going to change numbers around or reassign letter assignments, like a cipher system and everything. And it's not based on European languages. There's nothing to compare them to. So Germans were always baffled by this. They said, we have the greatest linguists in the world. We know practically everything out there, but they didn't know Native American languages. And so that was the perfect tool. And so you take this scenario and then put the coded vocabulary. The Comanche had about 250 special code terms. The Navajo started out with 211 and had over 700 at the end of the war. Then they have their alphabet system, which is, it can rotate. I don't have to use the same letter twice to spell something and everything. So you break up the patterns, and that's how you break codes. There's only a few vowels in human languages and a lot of consonants. And so the patterns start to give you clues. Well, if the patterns are not there, it's almost impossible to break, And so 37 plus groups did this, and again, faster, more secure things. And like I said, the Germans knew what it was. They asked about it. Of course, we didn't tell them and everything. They captured a fluent Navajo speaker, but he was not trained as a code talker. He didn't even know about the code. He was captured before the code talkers were formed. And they tortured him. He could not break the code. They played it, they recorded it. He said, it's my language, but it's not my language. It makes no sense. It's like gibberish, like a bunch of little kids just throwing words out. And so this proves the point. It was just totally unbreakable and everything. The Navajo code was classified to 68. The others, again, were open. There was no covering. But even the Navajo code, it leaked out. There were news reports and things like that. Very quickly for a wind-up, recognition. There's been 3 kinds: tribal recognition, state recognition, and then finally federal recognition. So these are some of the statues that the tribes have done. Comanche, Choctaw at the bottom, and then Navajo up here. The Choctaw one just went in 24. It's a real recent one. The Navajos were big enough, they formed their own Code Talker Association at events, and there's only 1 or 2 left now that I know of personally. The rest are all deceased. There have been monuments, signage put up, and everything, their own medals. The Choctaws got tired of waiting on the U.S. to do something. They created their own medal and issued it and everything. And so, kudos to them, And then this is the Hopi. There was 8 in the Army and 2 in the Air Corps, but the 10 Hopis ever used. State recognitions, museum displays, again, slowly, finally, the recognition came and everything. Navajos got their medals in 2000, 2001, and then the other groups started stepping up. And it wasn't the code talkers, even with the Navajo, the code talkers didn't say, you owe us something, or we should be recognized. It was scholars, it was tribal representatives, it was family members, but it was other people on their behalf that did it. And they were very modest about it. I got called up in 2004 to testify in Congress. For 15 minutes, I was on C-SPAN. So I've always joked that was my 15 minutes of fame. It's all this way since then. I used it all up in one little setting, right? But I did this book on the Comanches and the Choctaws, and then they wanted my research. So I went up there and testified. A few hundred people worked on this. And eventually we got equal recognition for all the other non-Navajo groups. And so the tribes got to participate in designing their own medals, right? And they were going to issue 1 medal to all the tribes, 1 design. And they said, no, you're not. Our tribe's going to have stuff that means something to us. And so each tribe, they have symbols, language, lettering, things that mean something specifically to them. So they're beautiful and everything. I went back up for the gold medal ceremony at the Capitol here. And then this is some of the coaches receiving, the families got silver medals. So each tribe got 1 gold medal, and then each family got a silver medal. This is the Choctaws getting theirs. This was the only Native guy physically able to attend, Edmund Harjo. And I got to talk to him twice, and a very interesting guy, but the place just raised the roof off of it for him. So, popular culture stuff has been made with code talking. Wind Talkers raised awareness, even though the story's different. And then these are just a couple of few of the guys over the years that I worked with. Different tribes, a couple of the Navajos. And these are groups that are not recognized yet, that I've got documentation for, trying to help them get their recognition, including some Canadian natives. So, and with that, I'm still working in this area, so I'll be happy. Any questions? Thank you so much for your attendance.
Thank you so much. What questions do we have?
It's always me. It's always me. I'm just a curious person. Thank you so much. This was so fascinating. This was so fascinating. My question to you is, from all of your research, what was the most meaningful experience through this whole journey?
I think just, at the end of the day, you know, these are not grandpa and all that, they're just like, they're like all of us. They're just folks at the end of the day, and they were, vastly modest about it. It's like, yeah, we're asked to do it, we did it, and, you know, okay, you know, and some of them even told me, now, you're making a big deal of this, we don't need this recognition, and it's just, everybody did what they were asked to do in the war, period. You know, that's just the way it was and everything. So I think at the end of the day, just the human aspect of it, and then, you know, I got to hear about what they did after the war, their jobs, and, you know, one of them went into a phone company and said, I want a job. They're like, well, what makes you think you can work here? It's like, well, I can do it. Do what? I can do it all. I run a switchboard, I can lay line, I can climb poles, you know, I know how to do this, I can splice, you know, and he did, he worked for a phone company, you know. But there's a lot of humorous stories, you know, like that, but at the end of the day, it's just the humanity of it, I think, and of course there's the irony of going through the boarding school things and then being able to step up and still know the language well and do that, and of course it shows us the value of knowing any other language is a value asset, you know, so the more you know, so, yes.
With today's code-breaking techniques, with everything at our disposal, AI and everything, would you be able to break this code?
They teach it all online now, so it's done. Yeah, it's over with. They didn't even use this in Korea. So in Korea, I worked with a Dakota guy that was real high up in intelligence in Korea, and he said we had ASAM-7 came in where we could encrypt stuff. We could talk open now, but it would encrypt it so that other people just got garbage, you know, and everything. So it was actually World War I and II, and that was it. It was cutting edge for its time, but our computer technology started to make a quantum leap by the time of the start of Korea. So by 1950, we had technology that was surpassing this. Now, just on a local level, yes, it can still be used because you don't have time to react to it. But in a long-term sense, yeah, it's like I say, all these languages are taught online now. So, yeah.
Here, we got time for one more from Mr. Lance Harris.
Thank you, Dr. Meadows. So I kind of have a multi-part question. Of course, the federal government, it suppressed traditional cultural lifeways for American Indians in the late 19th century. Can you tell the people here how the service in the wars affected traditional and cultural practices for Native American communities post-service time, as well as their feelings of patriotism and access to American citizenship after their service?
That's like 3 chapters right there. So one, World War I, there's a myth that no natives were U.S. citizens. About 2/3 of them were U.S. citizens in World War I. If you'd went through allotment, you were a U.S. citizen. And I interviewed people old enough to know that because they were in that position. They were voted in there. But what it did was it exposed the gray areas of saying, well, some Indians are not veterans or not citizens, but yet they still volunteered. Some were drafted, which neither should have happened. So it did lead to eventually to the pressure to make all veteran citizens in 1919, and then in 1924 to pass the blanket Indian Citizenship Act. All Native Americans are U.S. citizens, which is ironic in itself. But put that to bed. It revived both World War I, World War II, and all the others. It revived a whole series of traditions of send-off ceremonies, religious blessings in preparation for the veterans before they went over. Celebrations, dances, dance societies, things like that, hugely revived after these wars and everything. Naming ceremonies, because some groups have naming ceremonies where a veteran names you for something they did in service and everything. So it's been extremely positive. Now, yes, there are PTSD issues and things like that they deal with, just like soldiers in general and everything. They have their own ceremonies and methods to deal with that. But it was one of the watershed events of the 20th century as far as making Native people reach out for higher education through the GI Bill, stuff like that. political awareness and self-determination. You know, we're not going to be kept on the back burner anymore. We're going to be recognized and get a better position in mainstream society. Yeah, so there's a whole list of positive things that came out of that. And those are still going on today. The revivals of those things have not stopped. So hopefully that will answer the gist of that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Dr. Bill Meadows, everyone. I know some of you had a few more questions. He's going to be out at our author signing table, so please go by, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to answer your questions. Really quick, just a couple of instructions. Our next lecture is Food Power Politics, the food story of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. It is a ticketed event at $25 a person at Rolling River Reloaded. You can still purchase your ticket if you talk to Tricia at the registration desk. Where is Rolling River Reloaded? You go out this door and one block up and you will find it. If you are what I call more experienced and need a ride, we have a Colin van that is outside that can take you up to Rolling River Reloaded if you can't walk. So please make use of that. We have surveys that need to get done for my grant funding. So if you go outside, please grab a survey from Tricia, fill that out, return that to me. That helps me with the Mississippi Humanities Council. Once again, thank you so much for coming. We're so glad that you're here. Thank